Great, so welcome to today's plenary talk. We have two fabulous plenary speakers with us here today, Dr. Neil Akoli and Robbie Thigpen. And I am Chelsea Council. I'm one of the co-organizers of Global Coral Reef Week. I'm also a research fellow at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And we have Franziska Elmer with us here today. She's another organizer of Global Coral Reef Week and also an independent researcher working on stony coral tissue loss disease and sargassum. So for all the attendees here today, please use the chat option to introduce yourselves. And make sure you have that set to do a message to all attendees. And that way everyone will know who's here. And you can put a contact in there if you'd like people to be able to contact you later. So we'll have the two talks, one right after the other, and then we'll do a question answer session. If you have questions for either of our speakers today, go ahead and submit those in the question answer option. So you should see a chat option, that's to introduce yourselves, and you should see a question answer option, and that's where we'll be keeping our eye out for good questions to ask the speakers. So make sure you put those in there. If you're having any technical difficulties, the talk is being live streamed to YouTube. So you can always jump off and watch it on YouTube, or you can jump off and then try coming back on the Zoom link, and hopefully your technical difficulties will be solved. So just to get us going and to figure out who we've got here with us today, we're going to start with a quick poll on where people are from. So when you see the poll, go ahead and click on what location you're from. Okay, we'll give you about 3 more seconds to fill in the poll. Awesome. So it looks like we have about 45% of people from North America today. Also strong representation from Europe and South America, and a fair number of participants from the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, Pacific, Hawaii, and Asia. Fabulous. We're also going to do a quick second poll on what sector you guys are from in the field. Okay, give you about 5 more seconds for this poll. Awesome. So it looks like we've got a lot of students, people from academia, as well as conservation and management today. It's awesome. Also some representation from education, government, tourism, and industry. Fabulous. I think we might have a third bonus poll today. We wanted to just get a sense of how many languages people speak. So we have one last quick poll before we get started on the plenary talks. This is languages you speak well. Give you a couple more seconds here on this last poll. Awesome. It looks like the most we've got 3 people with us today who speak 4 languages. Kudos to you, that's exceptionally impressive. We also have a fair number that speak 3 and 2 languages, and the majority, like myself, only speak 1 language. Well, I'm sure we're all trying to pick up more languages. Awesome. Well, fun to get to know a little bit about who we've got with us here today. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our first panelist. So we have Robbie Thigpen with us. I'm super excited to introduce you to him. Robbie is co-founder and executive director of Marine Conservation Without Borders, whose mission is promoting culturally relevant conservation science among coastal and marine communities. In his plenary talk, Robbie will take us on a journey through the history of marine conservation without borders, from the initial idea to today's large network of ethno-translators.
Howdy, y'all. How are we doing today? I'm really happy to be here and very pleased that I was invited to participate among so many awesome people. Thank you. And I believe that we've recorded a video for me, and I think she's queuing that up right now. And we're going to share that video, and then I'll be around for questions.
I'm not getting the sound on it, Fran. Bear with us for just a second. We want to make sure the sound comes through with the video. We're still working on becoming Zoom pros. We are still gently on the novice side.
Off and on from 1996. And I respect these people that I live with and deeply immersed in their cultures. And I don't speak for them or their cultures. I would never usurp their authority to do so. I only speak for the project and what we're doing together. And I'm very thankful for that. And I also want to tell you that most of our materials begin as either English, Spanish, and sometimes both. And we're just beginning to work some materials that we're going to have. It's going to begin in Portuguese with our good friend Luisa Diela Viegas from Brazil. And so that's pretty exciting. And so, yeah, we're trying to create these materials. And essentially what we're doing is we're trying to fill in this gap right here. There's a lot of literature says that bilingual curriculum using indigenous language is important to create. There's not a lot of success here and there for whatever reason. And sciences has been particularly hard to create. So there's a lot of literature that says these things are needed. There's no literature for us to work on to develop our methods. So everything we're starting from scratch. One of the hardest things about this project was learn how to talk about it. Today I would tell you that we're combining non-Western ecological knowledge systems with Western science to create contextual biology curriculum in the local language of the indigenous communities that we serve. I learned about my ecological knowledge system of the Carolinas, low country of the Carolinas, middle swamp behind me, Big Pity River, Santee, Winyah Bay, the Atlantic Ocean from my dad, my grandfather, my uncles and aunts, and the other people in the community, and from just being and doing things in these systems. And that's how my indigenous brothers learned about theirs. They know about their systems the same way I do. They didn't learn them out of a book. They learn about this. Unlike many of my indigenous brothers and sisters, not all, but many, I also studied biology at university. So I have these two different within me without conflict, and I have no trouble at all code switching between these two different knowledge systems. I'm not going to talk a lot about our methodologies today, but this is one of them. We must be aware of the culture of the people we work with and their needs and perspectives regarding these natural resources if we're to be successful in contributing to management policies. Because if we don't, we lose everything. And something I'm going to really emphasize is whenever a child looks into his father's eyes and says, "Daddy, I'm hungry," no amount of patrolling or resource management laws or anything is going to matter. The only thing that matters is stopping the child's pain. And so we need to think about those things when we're doing stuff and always take those kind of things into consideration. This is my dad. He's the one that began my biology education. He drove a train for the railroad. And those fish right there are my favorite fish to eat on the whole planet. They're brim, is what we call them. And where I said I was comfortable code switching, there's some things I'm more comfortable talking about in the vernacular of my father than in the vernacular of biology. But really, they're the same thing. And I know everything about these fish that I need to know. And I've been catching these fish since I was a little boy and been cleaning them. I know when the time of year is where we're going to catch the most of them. You and I would call that animal behavior. Me and Dad call that putting them in the boat. I know what they eat. I don't have to do a stable isotope analysis of Sparkleberry Swamp to know what these fish have been eating. I've cleaned so many of them. I know what they're eating just by spilling their guts on the table. You and I would call that stomach content analysis. Me and my dad calls it cleaning fish. So you learn things from doing things in these ecosystems. But like I said, I also studied at the university, and as a part of my studies, I wanted to come to Belize and do a stable isotope analysis of the food web associated with Panularis argus. I had money for a lot of things. I was down there with the Northern Fishermen's Cooperative and met with fishers regularly. But the one thing I didn't have money for was boat time to collect tissue samples. So I had to earn that. And I didn't earn money for that. One day I finagled my way onto a boat and worked assignments. All I want is I'll work for you. All I need is a little tissue sample, and I want to measure your catch and determine whether they're male or female, and just write that down. If you let me do that, I'll work for free. And the fisherman, Polo, was hesitant, but he took me. And what I learned real quick is that I kind of knew my way around a boat. I've been fishing all my life and been pulling crab traps in our artisanal crab fishery in Winyah Bay. Fish got calanectes there. And so I knew what we were doing more or less. Didn't use a hook stick, but I had to kind of get that down. But I more or less already knew what we were doing. And that mattered. And pretty soon the word got out that I worked cheap, that all I wanted was to do some science stuff, and that I'd work for free, and I worked hard. And so I began a new education, learning about these ecosystems, from operating these ecosystems. I didn't just work with the lobster trap, I did everything the fishermen did. And so I'm learning more and more from them teaching me directly and from me learning indirectly just by operating these systems. And what I learned is that a lot of times my ecological knowledge wasn't that different. We got red snappers in the Atlantic Ocean up here. We're going to go catch some next week. On the 10th, I got a trip deep, and we're going to catch some. How many different ways are there to catch a snapper? Not that many. And we got other kinds of snapper too. And we got spadefish, and we got some lobster up here too, but you got to dive for them in deep water. We just got a few strays. And on the terrestrial systems, we got deer, we got pine forest, we've got turkey, we got raccoons, we got possum, we got a big cat that lives up here. And the palmetto tree is on our flag. It's our state tree. It's our state symbol. And what I was learning is that in a lot of areas where there's some things there were big differences, but other things, it wasn't all that different. I was seeing more similarities than I was seeing differences everywhere I went. And that was a wonderful thing. And I mostly was, my code was switched that way. I also learned the language. I don't sound like Lisa down in Placentia. She sounded like she was born in Gales Point. I sound like I'm a white man just trying to pretend to talk Creole, but I understand it good. These are my teachers. They didn't like me to use English in the house, and so I didn't. But they laugh at me whenever I use Creole, even today. And three of these young ladies, Ida, Celeste, and Yadi, will grow up to work on the project as ethno-translators for us. But they taught me the Creole, and they did good in school. They got good March teachers, were good teachers, but they taught me Creole. But sometimes they struggled with the homework when it was written in English. I also saw outside stakeholders, like a biologist from the States, come and work with the fishermen, and he's speaking English to them, and he's not realizing that some of the words in English sound the same in Creole, but they mean something different. Stuff would go wrong, and I thought there had to be a better way. And so I did something. I wrote a book, a science book in Creole, called Lee and the Lobster, named after my grandmother. And I followed the lobster from where she was birthed, hatched out of the egg, philosoma larvae, went out to pelagic, met a whale shark, came back in, lived in the seagrass, hung out in the mangroves, met a manatee. And it's a little four short chapters. And all, but it's a good platform to build from, good foundation. the children translated into Creole for me, and then I sent it to, I've been talking to Miss Myrna at the Belize Creole Council in Savannah about what I was doing, and they were all about it. The first guy that carried me fishing polo, I talked to him about it. He knew exactly what, me and him talked about it for hours at the time because we were in the boat together. And he knew what I was doing. And anyway, I sent the document to the Creole Council of Savannah, edited it, made a good proper Creole, fixed everything. I printed it, and I came back, and I showed it to everybody, and everybody liked it, said a lot of good things. It's beautiful. We had some nice illustrations from Deb. I mean, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous material. And then I carried it to Polo, my ecosystems expert, my indigenous ecosystems expert. And he said, oh, this was real nice. He said all the good things that everybody else said, but I was waiting. I knew he was going to say something else. And then he asked me a question. He said, what other languages have you got this in? I said, just Creole and English. I was excited about that. He said, oh, okay, well, that's nice, but you know, brother, I don't think this is going to work like you want it to. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's mosquito in Honduras, and what they're doing in Honduras affects us. There's 5 languages here that aren't English and Spanish, and what we do affects Quintana Roo. It's not going to work. You got to do it in all the languages. And I was like, wow. You're getting me there. And I started looking into that. I started trying to find linguists that knew anything about some of these other places, because I didn't know everybody in these other places like I knew in northern Belize. And I ran into a lot of brick walls, a lot of people telling me it can't be done, and all this stuff I didn't want to hear. And finally I got tired of listening to that noise, and I joined the Honduras chapter of SMBC and started networking with biologists throughout Mesoamerica. But I did more than that. I started reaching out to indigenous peoples groups I didn't know, other Maya groups I didn't know.
We're working to fix this technical difficulty, guys. Stay with us for just a second here. I see Fran shaking her head. Things are maybe problem. We have Robbie live. We can always switch over to him to finish up.
You want to do that, Francisca?
You should be able to share your screen if you wanted, Robbie, if you have the slides there, and then we could have you finish live.
Okay.
Do you see a button at the bottom for sharing the screen?
I do.
Perfect.
Does that look good?
Yeah, there. Can see. You just have to put it, tell it to present from the slide. Yeah.
Okay. So am I good starting right like that?
Yeah, if you go up to, I think, slideshow. Yeah, you can click through if you want that way. That's great. So
see, slideshow, and
yeah, and then if you have it clicked on the slide that you want it to start from, so I think, what were we on, slide that one, maybe slide 10. Perfect. And then you can, over on the left, it says from current slide.
Excellent.
Perfect.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, anyway, I joined the Honduras chapter, the Mesoamerican, or the Society for the Mesoamerica of Biology and Conservation. I started networking throughout with all the biologists that I could meet throughout the region. Also started reaching out to different indigenous peoples that I didn't really know a lot about. And I learned more and more, and I found people that could work with us and understood what it was that I was trying to do. And this is what we came up with. This is in Maya. Did this my good friend Hilario Pukahun from Quintana Roo. It says, marine conservation without borders presents the mangroves, Chukta Obo. Also had a little bit of help from Miss Felicita Canton up in Yo Creek, Belize, with the Puxicala Maya group. And through collaborating with them, we were able to create these materials. And what I'm going to do is, I got a couple of different languages here. This is our prototype material. This here is one of them. This is Creole from Belize. Need to thank Lisa Mulcahy for that nice image of Man-O-War Key. But this is what we got. This is on the above water ecosystems of the mangroves where the birds live. And you see it there's how to think clear with good sense, which is essentially critical thinking skills in English. And we got this whole thing written out like that. And you know, the Celeste and Yachties and Chickies helped us do this and all. And of course, you know, we worked the Belize Creole Council to create these materials, and Vanna Odes was our editor who checked all the grammar, make sure everything was fitting and proper. This here, we created this with Aminta. She's Wayu from La Guajira, Colombia. And she did this here with us. This is on the carbon sequestration and fossil fuels. Now, one of the objects of this first book was to develop our methods for creating these kind of materials. So we had to reduce a lot of the content. I barely mentioned climate change and ocean acidification. I don't mention blue carbon or deforestation at all, but we're going to rewrite this material later, give it richer and more robust content, so it'll cover everything. Like I said, our main objective with this book was to develop our methods. Need to thank Alvaro for carrying me to this nice place near Cartagena to get this nice photo. This is I skipped two. I need to thank Antonio Buciello for this nice photo from Belize of the underwater ecosystems there, where it's a nursery and juvenile habitat. This language that you see here is in Mosquito. I think I mentioned that earlier. And we did this with our good friend Scott Wood from Bruce Laguna in Honduras. And we're just talking about this is where all the baby fish are. You only catch small fish here. And all the fishermen know that you only catch small fish by the mangroves. And the reason is that it's a nursery and juvenile habitat. This is in Garifuna. Our good friend Elmer Mauricio Bermudez from Livingston, Guatemala helped us create this material. And it's really nice. This image here is, this is about erosion and what happens when we remove the mangroves. And it's a lot about how the mangroves protect from storm surges and things like that. This image came from Cuero y Salado, and it's by Ivane Argueta. But speaking of Livingston, Guatemala, I just got a new document from our new friend, Edgar Fernando Pop. He's Quechua Maya, so this will be our second Maya book that I'll be able to create here before long. And I'm really happy about that. All people in all languages are welcome at Marine Conservation Without Borders. No science book is complete without a glossary. And of course, our glossary is bilingual, just like everything else. This is the new YU word for climate change, and it's followed by the part of speech and the definition of that word in Nawayanaki. We also have some review sections and outdoor activities for the students. The outdoor activities were developed by Gracia Martamoras, formerly of Roatan Marine Park. And we essentially teach the children how to grow mangroves if they live near the sea. And that lesson and activity will grow with them as they become adults and have children of their own. Excuse me. If the school is not near the sea, then we teach them how to plant a native tree, because native trees are important too. I went to the meeting, the SNBC meeting last year in Antigua. Got a real nice response from everybody. And after that, I had a lot of meetings with people I'm working with in different groups here and there. This is in El Museo de Garifuna in Corozal, Honduras. And this was set up by the Ministry of Education of Honduras and Dixon Alvarez. They're standing with me at this workshop. And there are teachers here from all the indigenous peoples of Honduras. And we got a lot of nice comments. Everybody was very kind. And we learned a lot from this interaction, and we're grateful for that. And some of the comments we got, I think, are best summarized in these two right here. One is from Hilario Putcahun, our Maya friend. He was really proud that his language and ecological knowledge was being used to teach the biological sciences. And Laura Hobson, who works with the Mosquito and Garifuna, she used our books before I did. She used them last summer. I was pretty excited about that. But this is what she said. She said, your science curriculum can be used as genre-based pedagogy. You teach language and culture. That each sentence is a gold mine of grammatical and cultural information. Now, I don't know for sure, and any of you can correct me on this, but I don't think anybody in the history of our planet has ever said that about a science book. And so we're going to try and act on some of the feedback we got. We're taking everything we learned from these other materials and develop them, and developing these other language. And we're about to create a multi-chapter textbook titled Treasures of the Caribbean. And these materials are going to have richer content. I'm going to show you a few samples of that real quick. We're working on this with Fabiola Corona and Natalie Casablanca. And it's on order Serenia, more or less. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing we got here. All these images, except one I'll talk to you in a minute, were created by Madison Hutzel, and we need to thank her for her contribution to this project. But here, like I said, we're getting richer content with my former classmate from Appalachian, Anna Phillips, wrote this for me, a brief work concerning its scientific name. So we're introduced to taxonomy and nomenclature and all those kind of things. Now, if you look at this image on the left, that's not an Antillean manatee. That's a West African manatee, and it's wrapped up in a net. And when we get an opportunity, we try to use imagery to show that these problems aren't just a local problem. Sometimes it's regional, and in other cases, it's a global problem, like mammals getting caught in nets and whatnot. This is on the howler monkeys with Pedro Mendez and Carol Gutierrez of the University of Panama and the Foundation for the Conservation of Panamanian Primates. Carol created that image, and that's really nice. And what we're doing here was for the featured species in a particular theme chapter, we'll go into a little bit deeper into the taxonomy here. And this one is, we're trying to get to genus Alawato, which is the howler monkeys. And so we got a little bit more material on that, focusing more clearly. Also, I'm a Homo sapien, just like the rest of you. I don't do clades. I do family trees. So I put our family tree up there for this area. You see us in the bottom right-hand corner and genus Alawato on the center bottom left. And so we're getting more and more detailed. Like I said before, these issues with one species, they affect a lot of other things too. And a lot of times we're really aware of those things. And wildlife corridors are very important for howler monkeys, tapirs, and panthers or jaguars, as well as deforestation is a big impact on them. So we've got this picture, that's the image of this jaguar that was submitted to us by Esteban Peon of Panthera Colombia. So just these little small things like that can just show the bigger picture. We're creating this material with Laura Kim Joner of One North Conservation. And you see, we were already translating a little bit of this into some Maya there. And once again, we got some more information for the teachers, but we're showing once again that the illegal pet trade is an issue for the white-faced capuchin as well as it is for the scarlet macaw. Both of these images for Honduras. The one with the scarlet macaw is in Mabita, Honduras, in La Mesquitia. And that's a really nice place they got there where they're protecting these animals. And I want to thank Franziska Elmer. She's our most recent person to come on board with us. She's one of the organizers, and she contacted me about speaking here, and I was really happy about that. But as our conversation developed, I said, well, I don't really feel like I should be here because I'm not doing anything on coral reefs. And her response was, well, we can fix that. Let's write something. And so we began this. We only got this enough so we can show it here, but this is what we got. We need to thank some nice people about these images, but this is a good example of what our new materials will look like. Remember, the other one had a lot of questions and activities and 2 languages and a lot of things on there. This has just got material. And this goes on like this for about 3 pages. And so we got a lot richer content. This is just about larva budding and broadcast spawning and whatnot. And that's what we got. We got these really nice pictures that were given to us by Mickey Chateras at Caribbean Reef Life. Need to thank him for doing that on the fly. But this is a good example of what, some of the content of the material. And after these 3 pages of this data, we get into the part where it's, the review questions and the activities for that unit. Need to thank all these people. I hope I thanked everybody while I was talking. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Probably think I might have left out Save the Manatee Club because they just gave me some more images that we're going to be used with our Plecostomus chapter. And I've been a lot of great people that's helped me put this together. And if I missed your name, please forgive me. Don't remind me of it. I feel so bad, but I love you all. And we couldn't do this without you. So thank you. For everybody else, I want you to know that me and all these people are Marine Conservation Without Borders, and you can be too, and follow me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I'll let your information stay out for just a minute so people can write that down. And I do want to go ahead, don't forget, we'll be doing all the questions for this panelist session at one time. So if you have questions for Robbie, you can go ahead and start putting those in the Q&A section. But we're going to go ahead and get started with our second plenary speaker. So I want to introduce to you Dr. Neil Akali. Franziska, my co-organizer of Global Coral Reef Week, she met Neil last year when he came to South Caicos. Neil Akali was born and raised in St. Lucia and recently returned to the Caribbean, where he is the resident lecturer in environmental policy and socioeconomic values at the School for Field Studies Center for Marine Studies in the Turks and Caicos. His research interests include the vulnerability of small island development state, foreign policy analysis, international climate change policy, modeling of sea level rise within SIDS, small island development states, and hydro and hydraulic modeling of flood events. His research has taken him to Venezuela, Mexico, Tanzania, and the Caribbean, his home region. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Neil. You should be able to share your screen. Let me know if that's not working.
Okay, so thank you for this wonderful introduction. As Chelsea stated, my research is looking at the vulnerability and resilience of island nations to climate change at various scale of analysis. I do a lot of my work looking at climate change within the international realm, within climate change negotiations, and how do small island developing states can exert their interest in global politics so that they could demonstrate their vulnerability, but at the same time leverage their vulnerability. I'm not going to talk too much about issues of global climate change and issues of vulnerability within SIDS, but if in case you guys have questions about that, I'll be happy to talk to you about various experiences at the climate change negotiations, but also what I've learned in terms of how small island developing states try to exert their interest as it relates to vulnerability. What I will say on that front is that when you think about vulnerability of island nations or vulnerability in general within climate change negotiations, it's always associated with resources. So if a country can demonstrate their vulnerability, they have an opportunity to get access to various resources for adaptation, mitigation, losses and damages, which I will talk a little bit about. So for small island developing nations, they are always competing with other developing countries in terms of ways that they can demonstrate that, yes, we are indeed among the most vulnerable. Climate change is impacting us, even if we have nothing to do with it, and we need the resources for adaptation efforts, mitigation efforts, and to deal with the impacts of losses and damages due to climate change. So this is some of the things that happens at the international level when it comes to climate change and small island developing nations, the idea that they must always prove to the world that they are vulnerable, because vulnerability has been and it is still associated with access to various resources. So in essence, what I'm really interested in is three main things. If you think about how you want to deal with climate change and pay for climate change, the first thing you need to account for are the various causes of mitigation. So what are the costs in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in order to minimize climate change? So how do you pay for that? What are the resources that you need to do that? The second thing that I focus on is the costs associated with adaptation. So how do you adapt to the consequences of climate change? And initially within the climate change framework at the international level, mitigation has always been prioritized over adaptation, partly because at the beginning, when you think about trying to deal with climate change, states felt that they could mitigate the problem. Again, it was a bit of business as usual because the responsibility was on developed countries to deal with it. So the whole notion was we can just mitigate it. At the same time, small island developing countries and other vulnerable countries will say, no, we need to adapt to climate change because the problem is already at our door. Of course, a lot of countries, I would say, mainly major developed countries, were not listening, and the problem became worse. Right now, the final thing that we talk a lot about in climate change negotiations is the cost associated with loss and damage. So the idea that even if you have all the mitigation and adaptation efforts, you will still incur losses and damages because of the point we are in right now as it relates to climate change. A lot of countries are thinking, like, for instance, the Maldives and a lot of very vulnerable islands are thinking about losses of culture, losses, they might have to migrate. So how do we deal with some of these issues as it relates to climate change? So we are, I believe, for most seeds, at the point that we need to think critically and find solutions to not only adapt to the problem, but the costs that are incurred because of the losses and damages that are actually happening right now. So in order to look at aspects of loss and damage, one of the research that I looked into with Professor Mark Boyer from the University of Connecticut is to try to demonstrate that loss and damage are actual first-order security threats for island nations. So because of the impacts of climate change, you have countries or island nations being impacted, and it's creating human security threats. So their livelihoods are being impacted. And in order to do that, look at data from International Disaster Database. And that project is being continued along with two interns at the Center for Marine Resource, Ben and Anna, and I'm glad that we are expanding this project not only to look at the Caribbean region, but also all islands. And we are also looking at ways to not only look at climate change, but disaster in general, not only climate-related disaster. With this project, we only look at issues of major storm events in the Caribbean region. But right now, we are building on this project to look at all major disasters that have been impacting the Caribbean, Pacific, and islands within the Indian Ocean and Africa region, to try to argue that the disaster creates human security threats, which is something that in the environmental policy, environmental realm, we don't talk a lot about securitizing the environment. And I think that's one way to talk about it that will allow even major developed countries to think more critical about climate change and issues that relates to major disasters. So in this research, we looked at disasters, major storm events from 1960 to 2010. Like I said, right now we are incorporating all disasters from that same database from 1900 to 2019 to give us a better picture as to what are the major issues and vulnerabilities of seeds as it relates to these disaster events. Clearly from that initial research, we see that for the most part, we've had an increase in the number of storms, and that is what a lot of the science is telling us. In the Caribbean region, we will have at least, even if we don't have increase in storms, which is what we've seen in the past couple of years, but we will have more extensive weather events, more Category 5 hurricanes that will trigger a lot of human vulnerability issues, but also threaten the livelihood of small island developing states. And again, as indicated by the data, you see that more people have been impacted, and also the damage in terms of US dollars is being increased. But that's also because partly population has been increased in the Caribbean, but also as people develop. So in other words, the more you develop your industries, the more vulnerable you are, if you think about it, because the impact of the disasters is very detrimental to these population. So again, if you look at the loss of life, if you try to map it on the number of storms, you could see that Haiti and Hispaniola in general tend to have more impacted by the storms. And that's very interesting because Haiti and the Dominican Republic, one island, two countries, but two different sets of realities. So again, my point is that the vulnerabilities of different island nations are different depending on exactly the geophysical location of that island, and also the historical economic status of that island, the land use policies that have been used in the island. So we have to be very careful by grouping every island nation as being in one sweeping definition or umbrella of vulnerability. There are different levels and gradients of vulnerability within islands. And the same thing if you look at in terms of the damages that occur, clearly the bigger islands will have more damage, partly because they're just bigger, and so that kind of goes in hand with the data. Again, the same thing in terms of population impacted by these storms from 1960 to 2010. We have a lot of Greater Antilles, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Cuba being impacted quite a bit. So in face value, you would say, well, the Greater Antilles are the most vulnerable. But again, I would question that notion again, partly because of the physical implications of one storm to one island, and I will give a very good example of that in a bit. So if one thing we did, we took all the data and we did what is called a directional distributional analysis of all the data. So we put all the storms or the total damage, the affected population, the number of events, and if you look closely, what you see again, Hispaniola, Haiti, the Dominican Republic are in this dangerous zone in terms of the number of storms, total damage, and the total affected population. And if you Trinidad and Tobago to the end, you would assume that 60% of the time you will not get hit by a storm. And the same thing with Grenada, which is just outside the directional distribution of events. So the only two Caribbean islands that are outside the 60% of events or storms would be Trinidad and Tobago, and also you have Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao there too. But if you are Grenada, for example, you would say, well, the likelihood of Grenada getting hit by a storm is not very high. And again, you can see the same thing if you compared Haiti and Grenada, for example. You could see that the frequency of storms for Grenada has, for the most part, remained constant, less than 5 storms per decade. So Grenada doesn't get a lot of hurricanes or major storms. But Hurricane Ivan in 2004, I believe, hit Grenada, and that one storm had major implications for the economy of the island. So you had about 49 people died. The financial cost was more than $900 million. That's twice the island's GDP. So about 80% of the buildings and infrastructures were damaged in Grenada. 90% of the homes were damaged. About 75% of the public schools were severely damaged, and about 80% of the power grid was destroyed. So that one storm, although it doesn't happen frequently, puts Grenada a few generations in debt. And I think that's one of the driving force, the driving message that I want to put out there, is that it doesn't matter how many storms that or how frequent an island is impacted by any of these storms. One storm is enough to send any of the Caribbean islands generations into debt. And we've seen this more recently with Irma and Maria in 2017. The Turks and Caicos, where I am right now, has experienced its share of major storm events. And as a result, this has created severe economic struggles for people. One story that I heard constantly was during Hurricane Irma in the Turks and Caicos, in South Caicos, for 72 hours, the island of South Caicos was cut off from the rest of the world. And people did not know what was happening out there. And a lot of people did not know what was happening in South Caicos because of that storm. So how do you build resilience to deal with what seems to be the new reality for Caribbean nations? It's one of the things that I constantly think about, and I constantly try to figure out how to do that. I don't have the answers, so if someone has some great idea on how to do that, I'm all ears. But again, another thing to think about, if you look at vulnerabilities of countries, like I said, Haiti is especially vulnerable, partly because of its land use policies, its historical legacy with colonization. It's been forced to pay major debt to France for its independence, depleting a lot of its physical limited resources and a lot of deforestation, and that is very sad. If you look at the difference between the Dominican Republic and Haiti in terms of just forestation, for example, it shows a very different story. This was a tropical storm, Jenny, that hit Haiti, and as a result, the storm never made landfall. It carried a lot of rain, and because of that, you had a lot of casualties. A lot of people died due to major floods and major mudslide on the island. So again, that demonstrates the need to do better watershed management, but also it tells the story of Haiti's historical legacy with colonization that we don't talk a lot about. And I think that's something that moving forward we need to have a better discussion on that. In terms of regional implications to SIDS vulnerability, I'm also interested in modeling sea level rise. I think Chelsea talked about that when she introduced me. And again, with some of my students, one of my students in particular, Kieran, who was a student this summer, we are looking at various ways to model sea level rise in the Caribbean to help us understand and plan for events that would occur because of inundation in coastal areas within the Caribbean. So we do know that the impacts of sea level rise remain very central for the Caribbean, partly because a lot of the infrastructure on the coastal areas a lot of research has shown that the Caribbean is projected to experience greater level of sea level rise, level of inundation due to sea level rise in a lot of places just because of its location where it is located. And also, while you may not have well, sea level rise, people tend to think of sea level rise as a slow process, onset process. Sea level rise, you could have a situation where because of the tides, because of the storm, a 1 meter sea level rise coupled with a 1 in 100-year storm event, which a lot of people are rethinking whether or not this is a 1 in 100-year storm event because of the frequency of it. You could have increased storm surge, increase for over 4 meters, for example. And once that happens, it has a lot of implications, human security implications for people, but also economic implications for the country as a whole. And so we need to constantly think about not only the storm, but the storm surges, the surges that result from the storm, because a lot of the destructions are happening because of the storm surge as opposed to the storm. You can, if you have a strong enough home, you could pretty much weather a hurricane or a storm with winds. But what is really dangerous is you cannot really weather a storm surge coming in if you are living on the coast. And most of our infrastructure, our tourism, our fisheries, villages are located on the coast. So in order to do various modeling of sea level rise, what we did, we used a simple bathtub model. And one of the things we wanted to know is whether or not the bathtub model can be used as a way to provide an easy way to model, an inexpensive way to model sea level rise. And one of the things that we did, one of my students, Kieran, did this spring was that we compared the bathtub model with the slush model from NOAA, which is a very extensive model that requires a lot of programming and it's very expensive. And the slush model only covers the US because that's what NOAA uses, and a lot of to help people plan and let them evaluate where the storm is coming in. And in the Caribbean, we don't have the capacity to do that. I once called NOAA to ask whether or not they can extend the slush model to the Caribbean, and I was told that it requires hundreds and thousands of dollars, and I knew that was not possible. But using GIS or just GIS modeling, we can pretty much use the bathtub model to give us a very good indication of various level of inundation due to sea level rise. And I will just show you a few examples of some of this modeling. So this is Hispaniola, again, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And as you can see, so if you model a 15 feet or 4.6 meters level rise, you would inundate about close to 500 square miles of the island. And most of it are in the coastal areas where you have that concentration of infrastructure and concentration of people. So that area in itself is larger than Antigua and Barbados combined, if you want to look at it in context of that level of inundation. Like I said, you will not necessarily have a 4.6 meter sea level rise often, but if you have one of those super hurricanes that we are experiencing right now, you can easily have that level of inundation within a couple of hours. This is the same. So this is again So again, if you have the same scenario, 4-meter sea level rise in the Bahamas, almost all the Bahamas will be inundated, and we know the extent of the destruction we had recently in the Bahamas because of hurricanes. In the Turks and Caicos, it's even worse. The Turks and Caicos is a very flat island, a very flat group of islands. There's hardly no elevation, and almost everything is on the coast heavily dependent on tourism. There's a food security crisis within the TCI. Most of the food is being imported, heavily dependent on the US's economy for food. So if we have a 4-meter sea level rise in any point of time with any major storm, we will have that level of inundation, and you can hardly see any land in that image. So one of the things that I constantly think about is how do we deal with some of these issues? What are some of the policy recommendations? I think we definitely need to strengthen the Caribbean risk insurance facility. We need to have homes that are insured throughout the Caribbean. We need to figure out how to do that. We need to work a lot on aspects of non-economic losses and damages due to major storm events or climate change, because we haven't even started thinking about these at the international policy level. We have, but we don't have a mechanism to deal with it. How do you deal with a whole country migrating to another place? How do you deal with that loss of culture? How do you deal with food security that is culturally appropriate? How do we institutionalize this, and how do we even start talking about it at the local level? We also need to invest more in data, in research, and collaborate more with local and international community. I think there is a lot of indigenous knowledge on how to work around these issues, how to deal with these issues that we don't talk a lot about. I think Robbie talked a lot about indigenous knowledge and the importance of it. So I think that's a very important aspect of that process. How do we collaborate with people who live these experiences and who have better knowledge of how to deal with some of these crises that they face? At the local scale, I think it's very important that we have greater emphasis on adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage that are tailored to local communities. Like I said, the realities in South Caicos are very different from even North Caicos or even Grand Turk. The same thing with Haiti, very different from Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So we need to figure out ways to not only prepare policy and also issues that deals with adaptation and resilience to local community, but we need to have it that one that is inclusive, one that is I think bottom up. We need to understand both opportunities and limitations of modeling and of the research that we do to help better shape policy. We need to bridge the gap between policymakers and science. I think we don't communicate the science well enough, and policymakers don't understand the science well enough. So we need to find ways to bridge that gap. We need to have more investments in planning, and we need to be proactive. We should always prepare for the worst case scenario. Whatever the worst case scenario is, that's what we should prepare for. So when it happens, we are prepared for it. And it requires a lot of collaboration between the financial sector, the business sector, policymakers, and academia. So again, we need to build resilience and do a lot of local initiatives. Comprehensive, I think a comprehensive educational program, outreach program are very important. We need to have this embedded in our curriculum from kindergarten all the way to university. We need to, because this is the reality that we live in, and it has to be part we have of our everyday living and everyday learning. We need to address issues of food security. I think one of the things that that we don't talk a lot about is the impact of climate change on food security. And I think Robbie made a very good point when he said that no matter how much stuff you have, if you don't know how to, if you cannot feed a child or feed your family, I mean, this is the basis for all life. So we need to talk about importance of farming. We need to talk about ways to build soil and the importance of it and our connection to Mother Earth. I think that's a very important issue that we need to talk about. I think small island developing states have to rethink the dependency on tourism and the global economy, and especially with what's happening with COVID-19, we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to rethink a lot of approaches that we've had in the past. And I think if we can start thinking like that, it will help build the local resilience that we need. So that's all I have. I welcome any questions or feedback from you guys.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Neil. And thank you again to Robbie and both of our speakers from today. Hopefully I've put up their contact information so you guys will know how to reach out to them if you have any questions. Two really great talks about the importance of local communities and communication. We have gone a bit over time, so I do want to give you both an opportunity to answer a question or two, but we're going to try to keep the questions pretty brief. So I'm going to start with a question for Neil. It seems like some of the results of your work are suggesting that islands are a dangerous place to live. That's becoming more and more so given climate change. And at what point does discussion about migration and retreat begin to dominate the discussion? That's a question coming from Phil Dustin.
That's a very good question. Actually, that's not the first time I'm hearing that question. And and what I would say is that it's easy to say one should migrate when they are not asked to leave their home. That's one thing. It's a very tough decision to make. I think we have both resources and technology to help vulnerable communities deal with the impacts of climate change and some of the major storm events. That's another question. Migrate to where? And when you migrate, what are you? Are you still a citizen of that of your home country? Do you have the same legitimacy that you had? How do we deal with protection of basic human rights and culture? Migration in itself is a very tough issue. We've seen, if history has taught us anything, when people migrate, become refugees, the way they're treated. So these are a lot of things that we need to discuss. And I think it's a very good question, but we need to definitely start talking about that aspect of migration into the ideas of climate change. What about statelessness? Are these, do they get a passport? I mean, there's a lot of different, not only social, but logical and also economic stuff that we need to talk about when we put all of that in place. I believe there are resources to help both adapt, mitigate, and deal with the aspects of loss and damage. A lot of it is whether we have both the political will to act as a global community and the lifestyle changes that we need to do to try to deal with some of these problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Neil. I'm going to go to a question for Robbie. And so wondering, oh, just lost the question I was trying to read. There we go. Wondering what you've learned when working with project participants about the relationship and the importance of having access to culturally appropriate education. That's a question coming from Tom King.
That's kind of a difficult question at all. But what I would say, what I've learned is one thing that everybody hearing my voice has in common is that we all communicate the best in our mother tongue. We also talk the best in our mother tongue, and we comprehend things better in our mother tongue. And we do everything with our mother tongue. We love with our mother tongue. We eat with our mother tongue. For example, fried chicken. Pollo frito is the exact same thing. If you say pollo frito, that's just some chicken that you can eat to me. And I get it in any place, there's a lot of places I work. But when you say fried chicken, I think of my Aunt Thelma and my Uncle Peanut and her over that hot stove frying the best fried chicken on the planet and making the potatoes and all the stuff that goes with it. That's what pops into my mind. I remember, and I think about climbing the plum tree and eating plums in my uncle's backyard, or helping him in the garden, picking the peppers to go with our food. So I've been coming to more of a realization of these kind of things. And these are things that are common with us. You can think of a food that you grew up eating and think about, having that in a different country. And it can be the exact same thing, taste the same, but because you're talking about it in a different language, it means something different to you. And so those are a lot of things. It's an acuity, if you will, or of being very empathetic and understanding, and of not just the needs of the local community, but the needs of the local family as well. And within that, we all want to have books and things that we can read and that we understand the best. And that's, I've been learning that everybody's just like me, that everybody wants the same things as me. And that we're really not that different is what I've been learning. Thank you.
As kind of a follow-up or another question related to what people want and what they need, Robbie, has your group worked at all on any or any fiction literature and bringing any like science fantasy type work within the different languages? Have you guys worked on that at all?
I wouldn't even know how to do that at all. I tell a story about meeting El Duende in Progreso, which is El Duende is a spirit from the forest, little short guy with no thumbs. And but that's really a little bit away from what we do, but those things are contextual and they give resonance to the local people. But I've shared that story from Colombia to North Dakota with indigenous peoples, and they all have a similar story of some little guy with his feet backwards and no thumb. And so I thought that to be interesting. But as far as entering into our work, we only deal with the sciences, and these other things are important, but we only deal with the ecological knowledge that can be identified as science. I think there was a question that I saw something about that, and to answer that man's question specifically, that would be something I'd have to look at before I could make any kind of answer like that, because I'm very sensitive to the needs of the local community, and I'd be happy to take a look at it for him.
Great, thanks, Robbie. I just want to wrap up with one more question for Neil. Neil, you talked a lot about environmental and climate change and how that causes these human security threats. can you speak a bit more about how climate change affects the ability to grow food locally and the resilience capacity with these local communities and their food sources?
Okay, that's a very good question. So what we have, because of climate change, we have extremes. So we have extreme dry season. We are experiencing more droughts. So that is impacting just the availability of fresh water to grow food. It's impacting the ability to grow certain foods. And we also have periods where you have heavy rain and flash floods, which is the other extreme. And that is also impacting your ability to grow food. So that is one of the big things that happens with climate change, is having these extremes. Normally in the Caribbean, you have a wet and a dry season, and you usually grow or plant food according to that season. So you know the first 5 to 6 months of the year you will not have as much rain, but by June you have a lot of rain, and then you have stronger rain later in the year with major storms and hurricanes. You don't get that much here. You also have a lot of islands with, just because they are they're not they don't have natural forests, like even South Caicos, for example. You don't have fresh water, you don't have a river, a stream. So a lot of the fresh water, you have to desalinate the water. Antigua and Barbuda is an example, and that's a very expensive way to get fresh water. So that is also impacting your ability to grow food. Some places just don't have the soil, which is the basic ingredient that you need to grow food. And again, South Caicos is a very good example of that. And so it's very difficult to go through. And climate change is creating these extremes. So you have extreme dry season, because normally a lot of people who grow food depend on the rainy season for the water source that they need. And you have extremely heavy rain that is also creating floods and also soil erosion and a lot of different issues. So that's what we are seeing and what is expected due to climate change, these extremes.
Thank you, Neil. And thank you again to both Robbie and Neil for the great talks today. These videos will be available on YouTube. And if we didn't get to your question, their contact information is here, so you can reach out to them. I want to also thank everybody for attending today. And I want to thank the Company of Biologists for sponsoring and making our Zoom meetings possible, as well as Tradewind Colors for sponsoring gifts for the plenary speakers and trivia. And I just want to briefly go over what events we have going on tomorrow. So hopefully you'll be able to join us tomorrow. We have from 12 to 2 Eastern Standard Time, solutions from the Mesoamerican reefs. From 3 to 4, we have our concluding remarks plenary talk by Judy Lang, one of our co-organizers. And then we'll finish off Global Coral Reef Week with a trivia event. If you haven't yet signed up for trivia, please go ahead and do so on the webpage, or there's information in the emails. And you need to sign up by the end of the day today. And if you do want to be part of a team, there should be information on how to sign up as a team, or we'll randomly assign you to a team. I feel like we need a clapping noise like when they do studio recordings, but I just want to go ahead and say thank you one more time, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you also from me, and yes, hopefully we see you tomorrow as well.
Bye.
And I'll thank everybody too. Oh, everybody's gone except you guys. Cool.
Thank you.